The Story of the Granite Villa. Chapter 1. The Overlook of Darkness. It was a house that almost seemed to drown in its own isolation. Deep in a remote forest, on a hilltop where only the strongest trees could find nourishment, stood the abandoned house. An old building, once proud and impressive, now a mere skeleton of its former glory. The wind howled through the broken windows, and the doors, which had once shielded against the outside world, now stood open to the ravages of the elements. The Granite Villa, as it was called, was more than just a dilapidated building. It was a warning, a relic from a time when something malevolent had found a home behind its gray walls. For years, the people in the nearby village had avoided the house. No one dared to speak of it directly, but if you listened closely, you could hear the older generations whispering tales of those who had disappeared after stepping inside. Laura, a young woman with a curious soul, had long heard the rumors, but she didn't believe in ghosts or haunted houses. She was drawn to the unknown and had decided to explore the Granite Villa. With a camera in hand, she was determined to be the first to document the house and reveal the truth behind its terrifying reputation. Chapter 2. The Entrance. The day was cool and gray as Laura stepped onto the rocky path that led up to the house. The trees around her seemed to lean closer together, as if they were trying to hold her back. But Laura was determined. Her footsteps echoed through the dense forest, and she stopped in front of the broken gate. Rust creaked as she pushed it open. As she got closer to the house, she noticed that the windows were boarded up, as if someone or something was trying to keep the interior hidden. The granite walls, once proud and unyielding, were now covered in moss and cracks that spread like cobwebs. Yet, it wasn't the appearance of the house that made her hesitate. It was the silence, not a peaceful silence, but a threatening one that felt unnatural, as if the entire area around the house was holding its breath. She took a deep breath, pulled out her camera, and moved forward. She had expected cobwebs and maybe some dirt, but when she opened the front door, a blast of icy air hit her in the face. It didn't feel like a draft. It felt like a warning. But Laura pressed on. Chapter 3. The House Spoke. Inside, the Granite Villa was even more ominous. Old wallpaper peeled off the walls, and the floors creaked under her feet. But it wasn't the decay that caught her attention. It was the strange markings that had been scratched into the walls, as if someone had tried to write or draw something in desperation. Symbols she didn't understand, and strange sentences in a language she had never seen before. Suddenly, she heard a sound, a low sigh, almost as if someone was trying to take a deep breath. She quickly turned around, but there was no one there. The camera trembled slightly in her hands as she took a picture of the long corridor ahead of her. "If there's anyone here, make yourself known," she said, half joking and half to calm herself. But she got no response. Not immediately. As she ventured deeper into the house, a strange humming began to fill the air. She couldn't pinpoint the source of the sound, but it seemed to come from the very walls, as if the house was trying to speak to her. Laura stopped in front of a large, massive door at the end of the hallway. She grasped the handle, which felt unusually cold, and turned it. Chapter 4. Figures in the Shadow. The room was dark, even though it was still daytime outside. The light that sneaked in through the cracks in the boarded-up windows cast long, skewed shadows across the floor. Laura switched on her flashlight and shone it around the room. There was nothing unusual: dust-covered furniture, an old fireplace, and more of those mysterious symbols scratched into the walls. But something was wrong. She could feel it in her body. Her stomach tightened, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She was just about to turn and leave the room when she caught a glimpse of something in the mirror on the other side. It was only for a brief moment, but it was there. A figure standing behind her, just a few steps away. She quickly turned around, but there was no one there. Laura's breathing quickened. She shone her flashlight around the room again, but everything was as it had been before. She looked back at the mirror and felt a knot form in her stomach. The reflection still showed the room, but this time, there was something else in the background. A door that wasn't there in reality. Chapter 5. The Door to Nowhere. Laura walked slowly toward the mirror, almost hypnotized by the image of the door. She reached out to touch the surface of the mirror, expecting to feel the cold glass against her skin, but instead, her hand passed through the mirror as if it were water. She quickly withdrew her hand, scared by what she had just experienced. But her curiosity was still stronger than her fear. She took a deep breath and reached through the mirror again. this time willing herself to step through. It was like stepping into another world. Once she passed through the mirror, she found herself in a narrow, dark hallway that couldn't exist in the house. The walls here were damp and cold, and a strange metallic smell filled her nostrils. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn quickly, but there was no one there. Still, the sound continued, as if someone or something was following her invisibly. She started walking faster, but the footsteps kept pace. She reached the door she had seen in the mirror. Its old, rotten wood looked like it was on the verge of falling apart, yet it felt strong, almost alive, under her hand. She breathed heavily and opened the door. Behind the door was an enormous hall, far larger than could be possible within the structure of the house. The ceiling's height was dizzying, and along the walls hung large, eerie paintings of faces silently screaming. Chapter 6. The Master of Darkness. In the center of the hall stood a figure, shrouded in shadows. Laura could only glimpse it faintly in the dim light, but she knew that this was what had called to her. It was what had waited for someone to step into the house and free it from its captivity. The figure didn't move, but Laura could feel its gaze on her, as if it were piercing her soul. She was paralyzed with fear, but she knew she had to act. She turned to run, but the door she had entered through was gone. The house had closed in around her. She heard a deep, raspy voice fill the room. It spoke in a language she didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a voice of command, of authority, and it resonated in her bones. Laura tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. She felt the floor beneath her feet start to shift, and the room seemed to collapse inward, the walls drawing closer, trapping her with the shadowy figure. And then, everything went black. Epilogue: no one ever heard from Laura again. The locals, already wary of the Granite Villa, never went near it. They didn't need to. They knew, deep down, that the house was alive. It was waiting for its next visitor.